Hello, Internet. And particularly to those of you who are Bible nerds, you're going to have a field day today, buddy. Or what's the feminine form of buddies? I'm not sure. I don't know why I said buddies.
Ladies?
Ladies. So, first of all, I can pronounce the name right. We've got a guest named Tim Mackie, who is the head of the Bible Project. He'll explain what that is. But this is the third in a conversation we've been having about different takes on the Old Testament, the depictions of God and how they reconcile or not with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so I would encourage you to listen to this with the episode of Rob Bell in mind, with the episode of Greg Boyd in mind. But this is Bible nerd stuff. This is like this. He's a professor. So Boyd is a pastor. Bell is an author
and a heretic.
According to everybody else. Mackie's a professor, so they answer differently. It's really, really fun, and so hope you enjoy it. It's about an hour long, but there's some nuggets in there that I think are really, really good. So anyway, hope you enjoy.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, live from Portland, Oregon, or recorded from Portland, Oregon, this is Timothy Mackie. What's your middle name, Tim, if I could ask?
Timothy Paul Mackie.
Okay, so you were raised as a Christian, clearly.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, who's going to go for two biblical names? And it should be Paul and Timothy. They reversed it.
Yeah,
a little bit
right.
like Priscilla
Paul
and Aquila.
is my dad's name. Paul Ross Mackie. Ross.
Oh, Ross.
Good. Yeah, Ross.
Right. Well, now we're into the Civil War.
Yeah, right.
And so we are here with Timothy Paul Mackie. And if you don't know, this guy is one of the contributors, founders of something called the Bible Project, which I tell you what, the name totally fits and is appropriate to the project, but it does not capture the genius, the creativity. I cannot recommend it enough. Tell us just a little bit about what it is and what you do and what the response has been like about that before we get into the other stuff.
Yeah, sure. The Bible Project is, at its base, it's a YouTube channel. It's one of the few Bible-based YouTube channels out there on YouTube. Like, there's lots of kind of like very interesting, more extremist type of, but I saw
some good stuff on the Nephilim on YouTube.
I'm really into the
I trust that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I love the conspiracy genre.
So anyway, we're a YouTube channel, but here in Portland, we're a non-profit animation studio that has at its core me and a friend who are Bible theology nerds and friends from college. And we make videos trying to introduce people to the Bible as a work of literary genius and as a unified story that leads to Jesus, and learning to read the Bible as that one unified story and see each book as a work of art and theology.
Oh my goodness.
So there you go.
Oh my goodness, stuff. Tim, you've offended half our audience already. Literary genius. Tim.
Yes.
Are you sure about that? What?
Oh, dude, read it.
I have, but in all sincerity, we find that where previous generations held the Bible up as exactly what you're saying, at least whether or not they even read it, they had reverence and respect for it.
Yeah.
Now there seems to be the Bible seems to be a stumbling block to faith instead of a strengthener of faith.
Yeah, that's right.
So you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, no, those are the things that we're aware of, and some of our key motivators, I think. Whether the obstacle is because the way people use and or abuse the Bible in the public square, that makes it an obstacle, especially to non-religious people, even being remotely interested.
Yeah,
and then just the fact that it's from an ancient culture written in multiple different languages from millennia ago creates some obstacles.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, I don't read any other books very often from that time and place.
Sure I do.
So anyway, I think there's many obstacles people have, or you grow up within some kind of churchianity kind of tradition, and the Bible is so domesticated that it's just boring because you think you actually know what it's about.
Right.
And so all of those form different types of obstacles, and those are some of the things we're trying to help people overcome with the videos.
If you were going to recommend one video as an introduction, I mean, I know it's like picking your favorite kid, but is there one that kind of captures the essence of the whole project?
Oh, well, our first two, we put out one on the first chapters of Genesis.
Okay.
Because there's nothing controversial there.
Right, yeah.
But once we steered away from the controversy and just tried to show what a brilliant statement Genesis 1 through 11 is about the nature of the world and the human condition.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm really proud of that first one.
All right.
And also Heaven and Earth was our other video, which is trying to reframe our conceptions of heaven, which are actually really screwed up, modern Western conceptions of heaven, and reframe it to the Bible's concept of heaven, which is not a place where you go after you die, surprisingly.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. So let's talk about a work of literary genius for a second. Let's kick off with maybe Rob Bell's least creative title of any of his books. What is the Bible? So, how would you answer that question?
It depends on if I'm in an elevator.
Oh, yes, good question.
Sure. Elevator pitch about the Bible.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
And do I know this person? And is there relational trust?
No, we have met in Bed Bath & Beyond. And I find out that you're a seminary professor. And I say, so what do you teach? And you're like, I teach the Bible. Well, what is the Bible? What would you say?
Yeah. I'd say the Bible is this unified library of literature that comes from the people of ancient Israel that all points to the person of Jesus and how he is God's love and salvation and rescue for the world. And it's not what you think it is.
Ooh.
It's actually way better than you could ever imagine.
I've just
provocative.
I've just put down my duvet cover and I've said, all right, so Tim, tell me more. What do you mean it's not what I think it is? Because when I open the pages, I see violence and I see God commanding genocide and I see weird Levitical laws and I see all sorts of oppression of gay people and I see patriarchy and I see all sorts of ugliness. So Jesus, awesome. But man, God doesn't look a lot like Jesus in the Old Testament. How can you say the thing's a unified story? No, again, I've maybe projected onto the Bed Bath & Beyond duvet.
Jesus is awesome piece. Because that's true, and that still has a lot of cultural resonance.
Yeah, it does.
There's people are down for Jesus, not so much for the Bible or for the church. But so what's going on with that? Like, let's talk about Jesus then. Actually, here I'll tell a bit of my personal story because why I actually think that's the right way to start that conversation with Bed Bath & Beyond person. So I was raised in and around church. Our family attended church. And I actually still don't know why, but I just grew to really despise it I wasn't even a teenager yet. And so my parents, I remembered this, but they told me more of the backstory not long ago, where I sat them down at 12 years old with a list of why I didn't want to go to church and why I thought Christianity is stupid.
Yes. At 12.
And so here's the thing. This was 1 year after receiving my first skateboard for Christmas. So
okay.
Dang.
And I was all things like death metal, and that was early garage.
We're like the same guy. That's what I'm learning right now.
I love this. I absolutely love this. At 12, I was thinking about making out with girls. So you're and if girls were at church, I will go to church.
Living kickflips and why religious people are stupid.
Okay, yeah. I like that. Yeah. I like that.
So. Anyhow, most of my teen years, my parents picked their battles, and they would make me go to church on holidays and special occasions, but they didn't force me.
What was on that list? Do you remember?
What's that?
Do you remember anything from that list?
Oh, well, I remember we had a neighbor who was a single mom, and she had a little daughter, and she was friends. What are her friends? She was a neighbor, and she was a lesbian. And so I didn't understand this conflict that I could see going on between, like what I could see. She didn't like my parents. My parents felt nervous about her, and I just didn't get it. And that's all I knew.
Wow.
That's all I knew.
Wow.
But I just thought that was so weird.
Yeah.
And somehow my parents are religious, and it's causing this conflict with this awesome person. That's stupid.
Right.
Like it was pretty primal. This wasn't an intellectual move on my part.
No, but I think, at 12 years old, you didn't know you were tapping into an entire ethos that was about to hit American culture.
Yeah. This was the late 80s at that point.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it was it was a classic Pentecostal, like, receive the Holy Spirit for salvation and second blessing type of tradition, church that our family had been going to. And so there were some pretty intense things happening at church. And I just wasn't comfortable, and it didn't seem normal to me. And so that was another main factor. So anyway.
Was it the shofar mainly, or
flags?
Was it the shofar usage mainly, or?
Yeah, I've come to realize that I held a grudge and had some really deep, selfish, prideful misunderstandings that I've had to own up to and get over. So actually, I don't have as negative a view anymore as I did at 12.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway,
yeah.
So all that to say is the Bible was a foreign book to me. There's like the rainbow and the flood and stuff like that, but I didn't know anything. So sorry, this is all a long backstory.
No, this is good.
So I was immersed in Portland skateboard culture, and there was one skateboard park in Portland that was owned and operated by a church, a local church.
Huh.
And it was open multiple nights a week. And it was an awesome skate park, but the deal was to skate there, you had at 8:30 p.m. they would shut off the lights, and you had to sit through a talk about Jesus for like 10-15 minutes. And if you wanted to skate the second half of the night, you had to sit through the talk. That was their deal.
Wow.
And so it was like, deal. It's a great skate park. We'll suffer through the Jesus talk, and that kind of thing.
Right.
So I went every Tuesday night from 16 to 19 years old. And, it's just stories about Jesus weekly. Just begin to do something to me. And the phrase I've come to describe the experience was I came to a point out of high school, 19, and Jesus became this unavoidable person to me.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with my parents or church. It was just Jesus. And these things that he would say that would stick with me, and these ways that he would treat the people that I make fun of are the people that Jesus is awesome to. And so that was my introduction to Jesus style Christianity. And so I just fell in love with Jesus, and began to so my first time actually reading the Bible for myself is reading the stories and teachings of Jesus. And the guy who ran that skate park was a total Bible nerd. And he became my first, I didn't know it at the time, but my first mentor. Yeah. And so he taught me how to read and appreciate more of the Bible than just the Jesus stories. And so my introduction to the Bible was through Jesus. And I've now come to be so thankful for that. Right. Because I know that's not actually the experience of many, many people. For many people, Jesus is just a part of the Bible. Yeah. And it's the part you get to after you get through all the most difficult stuff. But I realize now it was me being introduced to the Bible and to read it through the lens of the stories and teachings of Jesus. And I'm just grateful because I think actually historically that's how the Bible has been viewed in the historic Orthodox Christian tradition. And if you think about a random person, one of Paul's converts in the church in Corinth or Galatia, that's certainly how things went down for them. Yeah. They were introduced to Jesus, the stories and teachings of Jesus, and then you get the whole story around him that makes him even more awesome than you already thought he was in the first place. So that's just that's my story.
Yeah.
Jesus is beautiful, and therefore I was taught how to read the Bible as a unified whole, a beautiful literary unified whole that all illuminates Jesus.
Okay.
And so there you go. That's just my experience of the Bible. And so I don't actually know, when people describe the oppressive Bible or the Bible that's like horrifying, and I mean, trust me, there are horrifying parts of the Bible that I've had to wrestle with, but I don't, that's not the Bible I know. It's kind of like a good friend that you have, and you hear somebody else's experience with that person, you're like, what? That's not the person I know.
Right.
And that's kind of been my journey now with so much of this post-evangelical or post-church skepticism and anger at the Bible. I'm trying to understand it, but I actually don't resonate with it on a deep level, because the Bible that I know is just beautiful and amazing. And that's what we're trying to share in the Bible Project.
Oh, got it. So when you, and I love that, we've talked about, Jesus is you don't trust the Bible and then get to Jesus. It's kind of like the reverse. You trust Jesus, and Jesus had a view of the Bible that you want to adopt.
Yeah.
But when you get to some of so let's say you come in through Jesus and you get to some of the stuff in the Old Testament that just seems so foreign, and seems to feed God is one way in the Old Testament, different way in the New Testament, or just how could God command this sort of ugliness?
Yeah.
What was your journey with that?
Yeah. Well, it was a significant one. I mean, I realize now, the issue, especially of violence, divine violence,
Yep.
in the first 3/4 of the Bible, was noticeable to me, like right from the first, because my bedrock is the Jesus stories. So there was already like a glitch in the system for me, and so I've read and thought about it a ton. I'm really grateful for the recent contribution of Greg Boyd. It was one of those experiences, I think many people have this when reading C.S. Lewis, where you read him and you're like, oh, he has a way of articulating a gut feeling or a direction that you have, and then he gives you the language for it. And I'm so grateful to Greg Boyd for this mega contribution, because it's helping me put some language to things that I've been feeling or thinking or working out independently, and it's like, oh, I'm not crazy. Like, so that's been really great. So there's two layers to it. One is the ancient cultural context of the story of Israel. So what the story of the Bible is God has married himself to a specific group of people through history.
Yeah.
And that group of people becomes the vehicle of his plan of rescue and blessing for the rest of the world. It's very strange to us modern Westerners. We would prefer that God be like the UN and parachute down little relief packets of salvation to every. You know what I mean? Like,
that's a great analogy.
But that's not how the God of the Jesus story works. He works through people. And so when God married the family of Abraham, made a covenant with them, he signed himself up for all kinds of heartbreak and all kinds of compromising situations. This really clicked for me actually after a couple of years in local church leadership, where it's like, you end up, but I think anybody who's been in a leadership position,
right?
I'm committed to this group or this cause or this vision, and you end up in situations where there's no good options. Right. There's only the bad option and the worst option.
Yeah.
And so, you know what I mean? What do you do? And so I guess I could bail. I could just leave the job and the responsibility altogether, or you work with what's in front of you.
Yeah.
And so that's a category that helped me at least work through a lot of the divine violence.
Meaning, was he commanding it, or was he just reflecting the Israelites' desire for ancient Near Eastern king, or
okay,
flesh
so
that
that's
out
a good
just
example. Yeah, that's a good example. So the king, and again, Boyd uses these examples, but I remember noticing them, and Jesus even acknowledges them. Actually, let's start with marriage, for example. The ideal on page 1,
right.
is a male and a female lifetime covenant monogamous deal, and then on page 4 is a guy who has 2 wives. And the story doesn't criticize him,
no,
right? Explicitly. Biblical narrative doesn't work like that. It just tells you, here's the ideal, and here's a story about a guy who didn't live the ideal. And who's he? He's a murderer and a jerk. That's who he is.
Yeah.
So the narrative gives you its own judgment on him as a person through letting you watch his life and behavior. And then polygamy all the way through.
Right.
All the most famous Bible characters, polygamists, all of them. And it says you would be forgiven for thinking that God is pro-polygamy.
Right.
If you hadn't read page 1.
Yep.
And so the moment God marries himself to a group of people and working with them in a culture of polygamy, then he works with it. And he chooses not to make that the battle, just like my parents chose not to make going to church the battle. They wanted to preserve the relationship so that through time there could be a more powerful form of influence. So I think we just have to reconcile. God's comfortable with working through long expanses of time and through flawed people, and even accommodating to their flaws. So that's one layer.
Okay.
And there you can get into the ancient cultural background of ritual holy war and whatever. There's lots of different things there. But what I've always still wrestled with is, so like the Canaanites is a good one. So
right.
God wanted to bring these people into the land. They didn't actually end up killing or dispossessing most of the Canaanites anyway.
Right.
but they did to some, as the narrative goes. And so the question was that the perfect expression of God's will? And if I look at the God revealed in those narratives, and I look at the God revealed in the stories of Jesus and ultimately in the cross, there's clearly a disconnect right there.
Yeah.
And so where I've been at is for the authors of the New Testament and the apostles, their base definition for who God is Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they do is appeal to the first 3 quarters of the Bible as illuminating the God that we encountered in the person of Jesus. And they're not pit against each other. One's not more important than each other. They are seen as complementary, but the baseline is the God revealed in the cross and the resurrection.
But wouldn't Boyd, if I could interrupt you for a second, central to Boyd's work is the idea that no, the revelation of Jesus trumps all the other revelations.
Yes. So this is one area where I'm still working it out.
Okay.
And I'm only I've perused the whole 1,400 pages. I'm only 500 in. Because I have a day job too. But making cartoons Bible cartoons for the internet. So I have a hunch growing, and I agree with Boyd in that the Jesus cross-centered God of love revealed is the baseline. And so he has a whole chapter on what he calls theological interpretation of Scripture,
right,
or a Christocentric reading of the Old Testament. And I've been immersed in Second Temple Judaism and the final stages of the formation of the Hebrew Bible for years and years now. To me, that's where the action is, because it's the cradle of the early Jesus movement. It's the seedbed.
Bible nerding right now. Bible nerding. Yeah. That was awesome.
So yeah, totally. So I actually think that what's happening is not so much Jesus followers going and rereading the Old Testament and finding something that wasn't quite fully there. Like he has a whole thing on a surplus of meaning.
Right.
The Old Testament authors didn't quite know fully. And I agree with that, but I think they knew a lot more than, as I understand it so far, Boyd's approach might admit. In other words, I think you walk away from reading the Hebrew Bible in 150 BC, a Jewish Bible nerd living in the Dead Sea Scroll community had a category in their mind for a suffering servant king who's going to die for the sins of the world and conquer the snake and crush it and bring a new creation. Like you just read the Hebrew Bible, and that's there.
Yeah.
And so in other words, within the Hebrew Bible itself, you already have authors who are reframing divine violence the way the New Testament does in light of the cross.
Okay.
And so who are the real enemies in the Old Testament? And a surface reading is, well, it's the Canaanites, right? It's racism, right?
Right.
But read again, and read again, and read again, and read again. Like Psalm 1 says, the Hebrew Bible is meant to be read. And you realize, like, the real enemy isn't flesh and blood. It's a mysterious form of evil that is other than human, but that also has been embraced fully by humans, and we can't blame anybody but ourselves. And that's the thing that God's going to chop up with the sword, Isaiah 27:1, right? The dragon.
Yep.
And it's a form of evil that has so fully enmeshed with humans on a personal level and a systemic, corporate, political level.
Yeah.
That when God defeats evil, he will be bringing down the kingdoms of this world.
Yeah.
It's the book of Revelation. But the book of Revelation is an author saturated in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
And so here's my point. I actually think you already have the direction Boyd's going. I think that he says the New Testament authors are going. I think the path was well laid already 150 years before the New Testament came into existence. And that Jesus is living out that story. And so the other piece that I really find helpful with Boyd and that I'm really thinking about is he calls it the masks.
Yes.
And this would be that these narratives that depict God commanding the ritual slaughter of children and women in holy war, that this is God stooping or accommodating to sinful human cultural practices, just like God stooped and accommodated to the sin of Roman execution and allowing it to affect how he appears to us.
Yes.
And so that's, for me, that's the one key thing that I'm wrestling with, and I just need another 6 months. But I'm on board with like a lot of where he's going.
Yeah.
And it's been very helpful for me. I'm sorry, I have a habit of talking too long when I get excited, but I'll try and summarize this. And I think he's right. And I realize it's a deep conviction of mine too. I actually think the God revealed in the Bible is beautiful. Like actually beautiful. And I've realized that part of what is a hang-up for most people is that they are down for Jesus, but whether it's the church or the God in other parts of the Bible, they have this lingering doubt that it's too good to be true, that God actually isn't that way. And so I think for me that's a root issue where I actually have my own doubts about God's existence on many days.
Yeah.
Like different people are plagued by different doubts, and so I struggle with my own list. But even on the days when I have doubts about God's existence, I want this God to exist. Yeah. Like this is the God that I want to be real and true. And on the days that I have the gift of faith from God's grace, that's the God that I meet in prayer and in my church community and in the faces of the poor people around my neighborhood and in the scriptures. And so I think that's a root issue here is, do we actually think the God revealed in the Bible is beautiful? And I think that's where a lot of the front edge of the conversation is. It gets masked with politics or, apologetic topics. But I think deep down, personally, that's the issue most of us, are really working through.
If your answers sucked, then talking long would be a problem, but it's not. So you're good. No, I absolutely love it, bro. I've got some questions that I think, and the reason I want to read these is we get bombarded with folks asking stuff, and so we're constantly, because we think there's beauty in allowing the questions to be aired. So many of us grew up in a stifling sort of intellectual environment where we were not allowed to bring these issues or even have one of the heads of the Bible Project say, hey, there are days on my list. It's more of a con than a pro. I mean, that's, that's a beautiful thing because I think that Yes, absolutely. As the world globalizes, we're in touch with things we've never been in touch with before. That we have to, our faith either has to get bigger, and our God has to get bigger, or we just shut it down. And so I just love it. So is that okay if I throw some questions your way that have been written in?
Deal. Yeah, sure.
Deal.
I may not have answers, but I always have a response.
Well, the first one, I guarantee you've thought of Ananias and Sapphira, which is here's, if we believe, one, that God is love and his expression for us is loving, and that love your enemy is a target goal for us and is achieved by God, and that the Old Testament is a shadow of the reality of the New Testament, and lastly, that we're all in process, for some better and for some worse, then what in the world happened to Ananias and Sapphira? We know they lied, but in some small way did they not participate in the kingdom? They sold a portion of their land and gave a portion of the money, not everything. And the God of the New Testament did not like that and took them out. Any clarity on this?
Yeah. Well, first, just to say, I know. That's one's a whopper. That one, there's one other text to me that's the companion to that one, and it's Paul's warning to the Corinthians in his first letter in chapter 10 and 11.
About falling asleep.
Where a number of wealthy members of the church were getting drunk early off the communion meal and then shaming the poor Christians when they came in. And Paul's like, dude, bad idea.
Yeah. Shaming
the poor in the name of Jesus. Don't do it. Isn't this why some of you have died recently?
Right.
Falling asleep. And you're just like, oh my gosh, what?
Yeah.
I think you just said that.
Right.
So to me, those are two. So in one sense, both of those narratives are following the same trajectory of a very common motif that occurs in the Torah and the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, that when God calls covenant partners to account, and when they've participated in his mercy and generosity, they are called to a high degree of accountability. And there are moments in the story when God will deal severely with people who are held to that high degree of accountability. And it seems to me that's what's going on. And that God will, in these stories, take their lives.
Right.
So let's think about what happened. What happened is Ananias and Sapphira died in this local church community. This is a bit of holy speculation, but it seems to me it's what Paul's doing, because Paul asked that as a question. Yeah. Isn't this the case? Couldn't this be the case?
Right.
And so it seems to me that Paul wants us to at least have in our imaginations that there are moments when God will deal very severely in love with people that he holds to a high degree of accountability.
How's that in love?
To kill them.
Yeah.
To kill them. Yeah, totally. I don't have at this moment a compelling answer to that question.
Okay. All right.
Because I agree with you. This seems super intense.
Yeah.
And for me, those are, but there are also two examples that prove a greater rule. But they are two outstanding examples. So how is that? You're right, because we all have a category of tough love.
Right.
Like if I have a 19-year-old son and he becomes a drug addict, and I can't let him in the house anymore. I have to turn him out. I can't give him money. I can't let him call me because that kind of thing.
Yep.
So where I want to fit Ananias and Sapphira is in that category.
Right.
But then what it forces me to do is to say there are moments where it's God's prerogative to take the life of one of his people.
Right.
And that's so intense. I'm not comfortable saying that, but it's not me saying it. It's these narratives and Paul saying it. So, but I have to wrestle with that. I don't know any other way around it.
What do you think of? What do you think of
the normal way of God relates to people?
Right.
The point is, these are very rare exceptions, but they are real. Anyway,
what do you think of Boyd's? And I don't know if you've gotten there in the book yet. Boyd's suggestion that it wasn't God, it was Peter. That Peter had been given the keys to binding and loosing. Paul had been giving the keys to binding and loosing, and the apostles held that sort of authority, and that wasn't God That wasn't God doing that. That was literally Peter doing that.
Is that? Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet, but I remember looking at that chapter. Is he called it when divine power gets misused? He also has the story of Elisha sticking bears on
the bears. That's right.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, to be honest, there's too many things to think about in a day, and I haven't gotten to that.
All right.
That one's 6 months down the line.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, don't be.
I care about that question, but I just haven't had time to get there yet.
Yeah, no. Tim, listen, I don't know is a really appropriate answer to some of these.
Yes.
Because, and that's where what Boyd will say, and where I'm tempted to agree, is that the revelation of God in those stories is only partial. The only full revelation of God we get is in Christ, right? The exact representation of his being. So you're getting bits of truth and revelation, but you're not getting the full picture.
So let me, because I haven't read the chapter, is Boyd's position that this narrative is depicting Peter as just as a human vessel of a power that's actually almost like too great for him. Yeah. And so there are moments when he'll overstep his bounds and do something that doesn't align with God's ultimate will and purpose as revealed in Jesus.
Absolutely. You see it with Moses striking the rock. You see it.
Yes.
You see it with the disciples wanting to call down fire on the Samaritans. Hey, we've got this power. Yeah, I got it. I understand. But they weren't able to call down fire. Yeah. But Elijah called down fire. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Man, I need to think that one through. No worries. I'm punting these questions to you. So
you know that story about Jacob wrestling the man in the middle of the night?
Yes.
That's it. That's Christian faith right there.
And see, for me, I don't know if it's for you. For me, in some backward, weird way, it's partially because it's so messy that I trust it.
Yeah, sure. I hear that.
That because it's just it's so reflective of the guts and the blood of human life in all of its beauty and all of its tragedy. And I just go, there's something here. Yeah. There's just something here.
Or flip that over, and you could say it the other way. You can say, if my view of the world is so perfectly attuned to my preferences and my cultural worldview,
right?
If that my view of the universe is so worked out that I'm not uncomfortable,
right?
Then I'm probably really blind to some really important thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that is engaging the biblical tradition, the Jesus story and the biblical tradition. You're not signing yourself up for ease.
Right.
Or for comfort, but you are signing yourself up for something profound, and it's going to require a lifetime of wrestling,
right,
and reflection and living. And I agree. To me, that's what's so engaging and compelling about it. And I'm just one human. I can't claim to have made that judgment about every other possible worldview, out there. But the more I go on in life, the more I feel like it's a gift that I've been given this story to be a part of and to wrestle with and see the world through.
Absolutely.
Because I actually want it to be true. Even on the days when I'm not sure it is.
Yeah. So, beautiful. Thank you. Question 2, I would love to hear more talk on the idea of scriptural inspiration. Yeah. Growing up, I was taught the entire Bible was 100% from God, speaking to us through human authors, but as I mature, I find this very hard to maintain, just based on the text itself. I've stopped looking at the Bible as a cohesive whole, which is one of your points, is that it is. Yeah. But taking each book as its own entity with its own level of inspiration. For instance, I'm completely willing to accept that books like Ezekiel and Revelation are directly inspired because that's what they claim to be. In contrast, I have no reason to see any exceptional level of inspiration in the Gospel of Luke, in which Luke specifically says, "This is a record I gathered from eyewitness testimonies, as opposed to the Holy Spirit came upon me and compelled me to write this down." The clearest example. This is a great question. That's why I'm taking time.
This is a wonderful question.
The clearest example seems to be in the epistles, where Paul seems to explicitly say, "Hey, this is me talking, not God." When I bring this topic up to most long-term Christians, I immediately see their defenses go up, and they treat me as if I'm doing something profane by even calling this into question. So I end up discussing this issue with other discontent millennials who have no better answers than I do. So I think that is one of the best questions I've ever received.
That's great.
So you want to take a couple shots at different points of that?
I do actually. I think I've thought about this question a lot, because I've been asked it from so many people in my own church community.
Right.
And two, I actually think this is a root nerve issue in the whole conversation about the Bible happening right now. So it's a wonderful question, and I actually think you have to ask it to get through to the next level of understanding what the Bible is. Until you wrestle with that question, you won't actually have wrestled with the man in the middle of the night as to what the Bible actually is. So I applaud the person asking that question. So there's a deep level assumption underneath. I'm not critiquing the question, I'm just pointing out something. That reflects someone who's brought up in a church culture where for God to speak through a written text, or for God to speak at all, means that it must have minimal human involvement or little to no human involvement.
Got it.
In other words, so what they're saying, it's a model of inspiration. I call it the golden tablets falling from heaven view of the Bible.
Right.
Or some people call it the dictation view of inspiration. Namely, it's that the humans engaged in producing the Bible were like zapped in these Holy Spirit trances and just, like they just wake up. And there are narratives within the Bible of some people having experiences that took them to another world and blew their categories. But is that the only way that we should think about God speaking through people? Because where am I being told those narratives about people having Holy Spirit trances? In a literary text.
Right.
Right? So even the book of Ezekiel doesn't quite prove the exception for that question, because the book of Ezekiel was a very intentionally crafted literary work that certainly wasn't just scribbled down, in the middle of the night vision. Years and years of thought went into the crafting of the book of Ezekiel. So this is a question for the whole Bible. So the root issue is, if the Bible is, I'm going to say, mediates God's word to me, does it have to have minimal or little or no human involvement? And it's my conviction that is just a deep, deep misunderstanding of the whole concept of God in the biblical story. And the way that God works in history and speaks into the lives of the people in history. And actually, there's a perfect parallel to this in the history of how Christians have wrestled with the identity of Jesus as a human and as divine.
Right.
And different points in church history, either Jesus' divinity or Jesus' humanity has gotten elevated one above the other, or just that they're to the exclusion of the other. If he's fully divine, he can't actually be fully human. If he's actually human, well, he's not truly divine. And the paradox that Jesus presented to people is that both of those are somehow true at the same time.
Right.
It's through a fully human Jesus who pooped his diapers and spoke Aramaic and probably had to learn Greek as a second language, and you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And like spoke into the political, cultural context of his day. That Jesus is, so the apostles claim, is the full revelation of the Creator God of Israel embodied in humanity, and that those two can only be true together fully. And I think the same goes for the Bible. And so what we're being asked to believe about the Bible isn't that it fell from heaven, or isn't that it somehow came into existence through a magical process.
Right.
Like a lot of apologetic energy gets spent trying to defend a magical view of the origins of the Bible. And by magical, I just mean with no human agency, or very little human agency. And that just isn't true to the facts on the ground. The moment I met the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, I was just immersed, because I had this falling from heaven tablets view of the Bible in my first years as a skateboarding Christian. And then I got introduced to the textual history of the Bible, and I was like, oh, that doesn't work.
Explain what the Septuagint is for people.
I'm so sorry. The Septuagint is a translation of the Hebrew Bible made into the Greek language in a couple centuries before Jesus.
Right. And that's the one quoted by Paul.
It's very often the Bible quoted, and it became the majority Bible used in the early Christian movement. And the Bible, the Hebrew Bible that those Jewish translators had in front of them when they translated the Bible, was a different textual form of the Bible than the textual form of the Bible that underlies our English translations.
Oh my goodness.
Which is why, here's how I was first introduced to this, was I was taught, hey, whenever you see Jesus or Paul quoting from the first 3 quarters of the Bible, go look it up. It'll be helpful and interesting. And so I started doing that. And what I noticed was the wording's totally different.
Right.
Like when Jesus quotes from Isaiah, and I turn back to Isaiah here, the wording's totally different. What's up with that? And then I learned about this thing called the Septuagint. And then I learned about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then it was over. It was just game over. I was hooked. So the textual history of the Bible is a very complicated history because of human agency. And so I'm not being asked, I don't think, to entertain a magical view of the Bible. What I'm being asked to trust is that through these human texts, God is both overseeing those processes, and through the end result, God speaks to his people through these human texts, just like God spoke to us in and through the human Jesus. And there's a much deeper dualism or division there between our view of the world. If God is involved, humans aren't involved. If it's human, then it's not God's involvement. And go back to page 1 of the Bible. The God of the Bible is a God who wants to share and partner with humans in the future of the universe. And God wants to rule the world and work in the world through humans. That's the whole plot line of setup of the Bible on page 1, the image of God.
Yeah.
And so the Bible is another expression of the image of God, a human image of God, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so when Paul says, it's me speaking, not the Lord, what he's talking about is Jesus didn't address the specific issue on divorce. But he says, I too have the Spirit. And so the apostles are this group of people that Jesus commissioned as his deputies to speak on his behalf. Yeah. And he gave them the gift and wisdom of his presence as they wrote these texts, so that what they said is what Jesus wants his people to hear. That's at least what inspiration, I think, means. And it doesn't cancel out the human agency. And it makes it the vehicle of God speaking to his people. And so once I was able to get there, all of a sudden, the complicated human history of the Bible became this beautiful man that I have to wrestle in the middle of the night,
right?
And engage with, and I've come to appreciate it and love it, because once again, if somebody comes into your town claiming to have a set of golden tablets falling from heaven, be suspicious, because they're going to ask for your credit card number, and you know what I mean? Like they're going to do all kinds of. I'm very suspicious once somebody claims that, and that's not what the Bible is. It's just totally a different category.
So a lot of this textual stuff, though, and its complexity, gives folks like Bart Ehrman and Pete Enns tons of fodder to raise questions. Some are really good, some not. So I've got our last question is about Pete, and Pete's a great guy. But he says, I really...
His early book about inspiration and incarnation was actually, for me, that was so helpful.
Yeah.
That was such a gift that he gave me.
Yep.
Yeah. So cheers to Pete Enns. That was very helpful.
So he says, I really like Pete Enns. However, I'm puzzled by his view. He seems to hold the view that the Old Testament amounts to nothing more than human accounts expressing diverse and contradictory views and experiences of God. He favors this view for several reasons, one being that it shows that God meets us in our ignorance. Assuming I have this right and that ends is correct, why think that when we read the Bible we are encountering the real God, if there is one? Further, what importance does the Bible have anymore if that's true, if it's just a reflection of the cultural understandings of the Israelites? It seems to become nothing more than an interesting socio-cultural study. Also, if one rejects inerrancy, does this lead to Enns' view? So I mean, first of all, the intelligence of the Vox listener is outstanding.
Yeah, totally. Great.
Because I think these are phenomenal questions. But I think I think your answer leads directly into that follow-up.
Yep. Yes. Okay. So, and I'm familiar enough with Pete Enns' more scholarly work to kind of know where he's coming from. And he and I are both big nerds on the final stages of the formation of the Old Testament within the Jewish context, because it was a textually immersed culture. And the Hebrew Bible wasn't this static thing dropped from heaven, and then it just sat there untouched. It's a text that came into existence through many generations, just like a quilt, like a multi-generational quilt from your grandma and your great. Actually, we have one of these in our home. It's from my wife's grandma, made of pieces from her grandma's grandma.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And so I use this as an illustration all the time for the Old Testament, is that we have material in here from many different generations, but it has been given a final shape. The final sewing, right, is from Jessica's grandma. And that final sewing was both her grandma looking at the materials passed on to her, studying them, right, honoring them, and also reframing them in a new context as one unified whole. And so what we see is that process of reframing actually never stopped. Like the quilt kept growing in the Jewish tradition, and it grew into hundreds and hundreds of even more texts in the Jewish tradition.
Yeah.
But there was some conception of the Bible that Jesus had in his mind, because he talked about the scriptures as a thing, right, as a thing you can read and know.
Right.
And so, as a follower of Jesus, what I'm after is the Bible that Jesus read, in which he discovered himself, his identity, his calling, and his vocation to do what he did. That's the Bible that I'm after. And so can we recover that Bible from amidst all the textual evidence?
Right.
And so on. Like, I think with a reasonable degree of confidence, yes. Certainty? Let's go to Pete Enns' most recent book, The Myth of Certainty, right? So with certainty? No, of course not. How can you be certain about anything?
Right.
Except maybe 2 + 2. You
Right.
know what I mean? That's not even real. That's just, that's theory. But I think it's true theory. But so when it comes to history, we can't talk about certainty. We can talk about probability. And so the reason I accept the Bible as a human and divine word isn't because I can reconstruct a perfect historical artifact called the Bible that fell from heaven. The reason I do that is because I follow Jesus, and I receive his teaching as authoritative for my own life and view of the world. And when he looked at this thing called the Hebrew Bible, he viewed it as a unified whole. And then when I go back into the Second Temple period before Jesus, what I see is, the Hebrew Bible was coming together as a literary unified whole. Like some group of people actually made it that way. And it was a human process that did that, through which God spoke. So to me, the textual history, we're just watching the fingerprints of the biblical authors and then the post-biblical scribes who kept growing the quilt throughout history.
Right.
But I'm interested in the form of the quilt that Jesus encountered, and that's what I'm after. This is a whole graduate seminar course that I teach here at Western Seminary. So it's not. I'm trying to boil down something very complex.
Of course.
But I don't think, if you're saying, do I lose confidence in a Bible that fell from heaven if I take all this into account? Yes, you do.
Yeah.
But I don't know why an idea of really biblical inspiration, the way the Bible defines that idea, I don't know why I would hold a tablets falling from heaven view in the first place, because that's not what the Bible actually claims to be.
Yeah.
When you read it on its terms. So the textual history of the Bible, as I can understand, like for a Bar Ehrman, is that he has what inspiration and what Christians have to believe is the Bible fell from heaven. The Bible didn't fall from heaven, therefore it's all hogwash.
Right.
And what I'm trying to say is there's more than just those two extremes. There's actually a whole world of possibility in between those two that I think is actually the most faithful to how Jesus viewed the Bible and how the Bible presents itself.
Oh, so good. Tim, you are freaking awesome. We've been going an hour, so we're going to honor your time. Although, man, there's so much more to talk about.
So much to talk about.
How I know, bro, but seriously, you just are articulate, and I so appreciate. I share a lot of the same inclinations about approaching the Bible through Jesus. Yes. And then submitting as an act of submitting to his authority, submitting to the Bible he held as authoritative.
Correct.
And that gets me into the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, and how he would have understood them. So I really resonate with that. How do you get funded for the Bible Project? Do people support you? I'm just trying to think of what we can tell our listeners, not only to go on YouTube, but are there ways to help fund it?
At the end of every YouTube video, it'll be me or my partner in the Bible Project, John, will say hi to you in the comforts of your own home or car or whatever, wherever you're watching it. And then we'll give you the web address of our website, which is just thebibleproject.com. And there you can find out what videos we're working on currently. And then you'll find out if you want to help us make the videos we're working on currently, there's a place to sign up and donate. But we're a nonprofit crowdfunded studio.
Yeah.
So we've got a growing crew of monthly supporters who are helping make it happen. So that's how it happens. And that's why we can make it all available for free, which is super fun to make. Not for me to make, to get a team of high caliber animators and illustrators, and then have their work be for free, not an expensive DVD set.
I love it.
So.
I love it.
Yep.
So, are you on Twitter, social media? Where are you at?
I technically have a presence.
Okay. All right. So
on Twitter, it's just my name, but I rarely. Yeah. I don't know, man. There's too much to do in a day, and I'd rather play Legos with my son than be on Twitter. So I'm not very active.
Okay.
But
all right.
I'm there. Yes.
All right. So thebibleproject.com. Tim, thank you so much for being with us today and for going, baby. Andy, anything you want to say?
Wrestle that guy in the middle of the night. Just don't ever stop wrestling.
Yes. Yes.
You'll never walk away the same.
Amen.
Yep.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, man. Kudos to all the work at Bible Project. Literally 2 weeks ago, one of my close friends came to me and was like, "Hey, I just watched this video on YouTube about Job on this thing called the Bible Project. Have you heard of it?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, actually we're talking to one of the creators in a couple weeks." And so I just thought that was cool to see it start to kind of come around in that way, knowing we were going to have a conversation with you. So I'm excited to share this conversation with him and do that. So yeah, man, you're doing great work. So keep it up.
Yep. Thanks, buddy.
Man. You know what's fascinating is and I'm sorry, I do need to go, but the Job video, something happened. It's our #1 viewed video now.
Oh, really?
And so our first videos came out over 3 years ago, and Job outpaced them. We only released it 9 months ago, and it's now double outpaced all those videos.
Wow.
There's something with the YouTube algorithm that when they see videos getting hits, they just start putting it in front of more people.
Yep.
And people want to know about Job. Isn't that interesting? I think it's so interesting.
It is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the primal question. Is everything on earth God's will?
I already knew that, but now it's like yet another live test case to prove that God in suffering will be a question that never stops being a felt issue, even for non-religious people, because the YouTube comment fade is so antagonistic, so many angry people.
Oh, sure.
But people are watching it and thinking about it, so that's cool.
Right. I love it, dude.
Anyway.
And thanks for your time today, bub.
Yeah, absolutely. It was nice to re-meet you and to meet you, Andy.
You too, Tim. Thanks.
Dude, that guy is amazing. I mean, Bell, Boyd, and Mackie each are theology Bible geeks. And
See, what I imagined is that feels like this wonderful, warm conversation I can imagine in my mind on like a rainy kind of day in Portland.
Oh my goodness.
You look out the window and it's just all greenery from trees.
Right.
So the house is kind of dark because it's midday,
Right.
but it's just this kind of flowing, warm, gentle conversation.
Yeah,
I mean, it just...
I wish you got to see him, because he looks the part. He's just of a gentle, thoughtful, almost contemplative, poetic guy. I mean, it's really, but I love that there's overlap. So between what Rob was saying and what Greg is saying and what Tim's saying, there's overlap. And then there's, of course, divergence. And, for those of us listening and wrestling with the scriptures and how they are authoritative and if they're authoritative and what's this mean, we really were hopeful that you would get three different perspectives that help in terms of like give you an overview of all the different ways to approach this. Here's the key thing, though, that Jesus is the picture. He's the baseline in Tim's language, or in Boyd's language, he is the revelation that trumps all of our other revelations. The goal of our podcast is always to make Jesus beautiful, and that's not making him beautiful. That's just revealing how beautiful he is, of course. But we were excited to do this series. We hope you've enjoyed it. Obviously, we'll do more. I mean, this is like, there's so much more to discuss. We could have kept him on for another 2 hours.
Easy.
I mean, easy.
Yeah, easy.
So anyway, give us your feedback on it. We love doing this stuff. We're so grateful for you, for our Patreon supporters that allow us to do this stuff. And so thank you, guys. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you, and in these days may he give you peace. Until next time, my brothers and sisters, see ya.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Vox Podcast. Learn more about us at voxpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Vox Podcast, and now support us on Patreon at patreon.com/voxpodcast.